Wild Animals I Have Known by Ernest Thompson Seton. Raggylug, the story of a cottontail rabbit. Raggylug, or Rag, was the name of a young cottontail rabbit. It was given him from his torn and ragged ear, a life mark that he got in his first adventure. He lived with his mother in Olifant swamp, where I made their acquaintance and gathered, in 100 different ways, the little bits of proof and scraps of truth that at length enabled me to write this history. Those who do not know the animals well may think I have humanized them, but those who have lived so near them as to know somewhat of their ways and their minds will riot think so. Truly, rabbits have no speech as we understand it, but they have a way of conveying ideas by a system of sounds, signs, scents, whisker touches, movements, an example that answers the purpose of speech. And it must be remembered that though in telling this story I freely translate from rabbit into English, I repeat nothing that they did not say. The rank swamp grass bent over and concealed the snug nest where Raggylug's mother had hidden him. She had partly covered him with some of the bedding, and, as always, her last warning was to lie low and say nothing, whatever happens. Though tucked in bed, he was wide awake, and his bright eyes were taking in that part of his little green world that was straight above. A blue jay and a red squirrel, two notorious thieves, were loudly berating each other for stealing, and at one time Rag's home bush was the center of their fight. A yellow warbler caught a blue butterfly but 6 inches from his nose, and a scarlet and black ladybug, serenely waving her knobbed feelers, took a long walk up one grass blade, down another, and across the nest and over Rag's face. And yet he never moved nor even winked. After a while he heard a strange rustling of the leaves in the near thicket. It was an odd, continuous sound, and though it went this way and that way and came ever nearer, there was no patter of feet with it. Rag had lived his whole life in the swamp. He was 3 weeks old, and yet had never heard anything like this. Of course, his curiosity was greatly aroused. His mother had cautioned him to lie low, but that was understood to be in case of danger, and this strange sound without footfalls could not be anything to fear. The low rasping went past close at hand, then to the right, then back, and seemed going away. Rag felt he knew what he was about. He wasn't a baby. It was his duty to learn what it was. He slowly raised his roly-poly body on his short, fluffy legs, lifted his little round head above the covering of his nest, and peeped out into the woods. The sound had ceased as soon as he moved. He saw nothing, so took one step forward to a clear view, and instantly found himself face to face with an enormous black serpent. "Mammy!" he screamed in mortal terror as the monster darted at him. With all the strength of his tiny limbs he tried to run. But in a flash the snake had him by one ear and whipped around him with his coils to gloat over the helpless little baby bunny he had secured for dinner. Ma'am, my, gasped poor little Raggylug as the cruel monster began slowly choking him to death. Very soon the little one's cry would have ceased, but bounding through the woods straight as an arrow came Mammy. No longer a shy, helpless little Molly Cottontail, ready to fly from a shadow. The mother's love was strong in her. The cry of her baby had filled her with the courage of a hero, and hop, she went over that horrible reptile. Whack, she struck down at him with her sharp hind claws as she passed, giving him such a stinging blow that he squirmed with pain and hissed with anger. "Mammy!" came feebly from the little one, and Mammy came leaping again and struck harder and fiercer until the loathsome reptile let go the little one's ear and tried to bite the old one as she leaped over. But all he got was a mouthful of wool each time, and Molly's fierce blows began to tell, as long bloody rips were torn in the black snake's scaly armor. Things were now looking bad for the snake, and bracing himself for the next charge, he lost his tight hold on baby bunny, who at once wriggled out of the coils and away into the underbrush, breathless and terribly frightened, but unhurt save that his left ear was much torn by the teeth of that dreadful serpent. Molly now had gained all she wanted. She had no notion of fighting for glory or revenge. Away she went into the woods, and the little one followed the shining beacon of her snow-white tail until she led him to a safe corner of the swamp. Old Olifant's swamp was a rough, brambly tract of second-growth woods with a marshy pond and a stream through the middle. A few ragged remnants of the old forest still stood in it, and a few of the still older trunks were lying about as dead logs in the brushwood. The land about the pond was of that willow-grown sedgy kind that cats and horses avoid, but that cattle do not fear. The drier zones were overgrown with briars and young trees. The outermost belt of all, that next the fields, was of thrifty, gummy-trunked young pines whose living needles in air and dead ones on earth offer so delicious, worthless waste they grow on. All around for a long way were smooth fields, and the only wild tracks that ever crossed these fields were those of a thoroughly bad and unscrupulous fox that lived only too near. The chief indwellers of the swamp were Molly and Rag. Their nearest neighbors were far away, and their nearest kin were dead. This was their home, and here they lived together, and here Rag received the training that made his success in life. Molly was a good little mother and gave him a careful bringing up. The first thing he learned was to lie low and say nothing. His adventure with the snake taught him the wisdom of this. Rag never forgot that lesson. Afterward, he did as he was told, and it made the other things come more easily. The second lesson he learned was freeze. It grows out of the first, and Rag was taught it as soon as he could run. Freezing is simply doing nothing, turning into a statue. As soon as he finds a foe near, no matter what he is doing, a well-trained cottontail keeps just as he is and stops all movement. For the creatures of the woods are of the same color as the things in the woods, and catch the eye only while moving. So when enemies chance together, the one who first sees the other can keep himself unseen by freezing, and thus have all the advantage of choosing the time for attack or escape. Only those who live in the woods know the importance of this. Every wild creature and every hunter must learn it. All learn to do it well, but not one of them can beat Molly Cottontail in the doing. Rag's mother taught him this trick by example. When the white cotton cushion that she always carried to sit on went bobbing away through the woods, of course, Rag ran his hardest to keep up. But when Molly stopped and froze, the natural wish to copy made him do the same. But the best lesson of all that Rag learned from his mother was the secret of the briar brush. It is a very old secret now, and to make it plain, you must first hear why the briar brush quarreled with the beasts. Long ago, the roses used to grow on bushes that had no thorns, but the squirrels and mice used to climb after them. The cattle used to knock them off with their horns. The possum would twitch them off with his long tail, and the deer with his sharp hoofs would break them down. So the briar brush armed itself with spikes to protect its roses and declared eternal war on all creatures that climbed trees or had horns or hooves or long tails. This left the briar brush at peace with none but Molly Cottontail, who could not climb, was hornless, hoofless, and had scarcely any tail at all. In truth, the cottontail had never harmed a briar rose, and having now so many enemies, the rose took the rabbit into a special friendship, and when dangers are threatening poor Bunny, he flies to the nearest briar brush, certain that it is ready with a million keen and poisoned daggers to defend him. So the secret that Rag learned from his mother was, the briar brush is your best friend. Much of the time that season was spent in learning the lay of the land and the bramble and briar mazes. And Rag learned them so well that he could go all around the swamp by 2 different ways and never leave the friendly briars at any place for more than 5 hops. It is not long since the foes of the cottontails were disgusted to find that man had brought a new kind of bramble and planted it in long lines throughout the country. It was so strong that no creatures could break it down, and so sharp that the toughest skin was torn by it. Each year there was more of it, and each year it became a more serious matter to the wild creatures. But Molly Cottontail had no fear of it. She was not brought up in the briars for nothing. Dogs and foxes, cattle and sheep, and even man himself might be torn by those fearful spikes. But Molly understands it and lives and thrives under it. And the further it spreads, the more safe country there is for the cottontail. And the name of this new and dreaded bramble is the barbed wire fence. Molly had no other children to look after now, so Rag had all her care. He was unusually quick and bright as well as strong, and he had uncommonly good chances, so he got on remarkably well. All the season she kept him busy learning the tricks of the trail, and what to eat and drink and what not to touch. Day by day she worked to train him. Little by little she taught him, putting into his mind hundreds of ideas that her own life or early training had stored in hers, and so equipped him with the knowledge that makes life possible to their kind. Close by her side in the clover field or the thicket, he would sit and copy her when she wobbled her nose to keep her smeller clear, and pull the bite from her mouth or taste her lips to make sure he was getting the same kind of fodder. Still copying her, he learned to comb his ears with his claws and to dress his coat and to bite the burrs out of his vest and socks. He learned, too, that nothing but clear dewdrops from the briars were fit for a rabbit to drink, as water which has once touched the earth must surely bear some taint. Thus he began the study of woodcraft, the oldest of all sciences. As soon as Rag was big enough to go out alone, his mother taught him the signal code. Rabbits telegraph each other by thumping on the ground with their hind feet. Along the ground sound carries far. A thump that at 6 feet from the earth is not heard at 20 yards will, near the ground, be heard at least 100 yards. Rabbits have very keen hearing, and so might hear this same thump at 200 yards, and that would reach from end to end of Olifant swamp. A single thump means look out or freeze. A slow thump means come. A fast thump means danger, and a very fast thump means run for dear life. At another time, when the weather was fine and the blue jays were quarreling among themselves, a sure sign that no dangerous foe was about, Rag began a new study. Molly, by flattening her ears, gave the sign to squat. Then she ran far away in the thicket and gave the thumping signal for come. Rag set out at a run to the place but could not find Molly. He thumped but got no reply. Setting carefully about his search, he found her foot scent, and following this strange guide that the beasts all know so well and man does not know at all, he worked out the trail and found her where she was hidden. Thus he got his first lesson in trailing, and thus it was that the games of hide-and-seek they played became the schooling for the serious chase of which there was so much in his afterlife. Before that first season of schooling was over, he had learned all the principal tricks by which a rabbit lives, and in not a few problems showed himself a veritable genius. He was an adept at tree, dodge, and squat. He could play log lump, with wind and balk with backtrack, so well that he scarcely needed any other tricks. He had not yet tried it, but he knew just how to play barbed wire, which is a new trick of the brilliant order. He had made a special study of Zand, which burns up all scent, and was deeply versed in change off, fence and double, as well as hole up, which is a trick requiring longer notice. And yet he never forgot that lie low is the beginning of all wisdom and briar brush, the only trick that is always safe. He was taught the signs by which to know all his foes, and then the way to baffle them. For hawks, owls, foxes, hounds, curs, minks, weasels, cats, skunks, coons, and men each have a different plan of pursuit. And for each and all of these evils, he was taught a remedy. And for knowledge of the enemy's approach, he learnt to depend first on himself and his mother, and then on the blue jay. "Never neglect the blue jay's warning," said Molly. "He is a mischief maker, a marplot, and a thief all the time. But nothing escapes him. He wouldn't mind harming us, but he cannot, thanks to the briars, and his enemies are ours, so it is well to heed him. If the woodpecker cries a warning, you can trust him. He is honest. But he is a fool beside the blue jay, and though the blue jay often tells lies for mischief, you are safe to believe him when he brings ill news. The barbed wire trick takes a deal of nerve and the best of legs. It was long before Rag ventured to play it, but as he came to his full powers, it became one of his favorites. "It's fine play for those who can do it," said Molly. "First you lead off your dog on a straightaway and warm him up a bit by nearly letting him catch you. Then, keeping just one hop ahead, you lead him at a long slant full tilt into a breast-high barbed wire. I've seen many a dog and fox crippled and one big hound killed outright this way, but I've also seen more than one rabbit lose his life in trying it." Rag early learnt what some rabbits never learn at all, that hole-up is not such a fine ruse as it seems. It may be the certain safety of a wise rabbit, but soon or late is a sure death trap to a fool. A young rabbit always thinks of it first. An old rabbit never tries it till all others fail. It means escape from a man or dog, a fox or a bird of prey, but it means sudden death if the foe is a ferret, mink, skunk, or weasel. There were but two ground holes in the swamp, one on the sunning bank, which was a dry, sheltered knoll in the south end. It was open and sloping to the sun, and here on fine days the cottontails took their sun baths. They stretched out among the fragrant pine needles in wintergreen and odd cat-like positions, and turned slowly over as though roasting and wishing all sides well done. And they blinked and panted and squirmed as if in dreadful pain. Yet this was one of the keenest enjoyments they knew. Just over the brow of the knoll was a large pine stump. Its grotesque roots wriggled out above the yellow sandbank like dragons, and under their protecting claws a sulky old woodchuck had digged a den long ago. He became more sour and ill-tempered as weeks went by, and one day waited to quarrel with Olifant's dog instead of going in so that Molly Cottontail was able to take possession of the den an hour later. This, the pine root hole, was afterward very coolly taken by a self-sufficient young skunk who with less valor might have enjoyed greater longevity, for he imagined that even man with a gun would fly from him. Instead of keeping Molly from the den for good, therefore, his reign, like that of a certain Hebrew king, was over in 7 days. The other, the fern hole, was in a fern thicket next the clover field. It was small and damp and useless except as a last retreat. It also was the work of a woodchuck, a well-meaning friendly neighbor, but a harebrained youngster whose skin in the form of a whiplash was now developing higher horsepower in the Olifant working team. Simple justice, said the old man, for that hide was raised on stolen feed that the team would have turned into horsepower anyway. The Cottontails were now sole owners of the holes and did not go near them when they could help it, lest anything like a path should be made that might betray these last retreats to an enemy. There was also the hollow hickory, which, though nearly fallen, was still green, and had the great advantage of being open at both ends. This had long been the residence of one Lotor, a solitary old coon whose ostensible calling was frog hunting, and who, like the monks of old, was supposed to abstain from all flesh food. But it was shrewdly suspected that he needed but a chance to indulge in a diet of rabbit. When at last one dark night he was killed while raiding Olifant's henhouse, Molly, so far from feeling a pang of regret, took possession of his cozy nest with a sense of unbounded relief. Bright August sunlight was flooding the swamp in the morning. Everything seemed soaking in the warm radiance. A little brown swamp sparrow was teetering on a long rush in the pond. Beneath him there were open spaces of dirty water that brought down a few scraps of the blue sky and worked it in the yellow duckweed into an exquisite mosaic, with a little wrong-side picture of the bird in the middle. On the bank behind was a great vigorous growth of golden-green skunk cabbage that cast dense shadow over the brown swamp tussocks. The eyes of the swamp sparrow were not trained to take in the color glories, but he saw what we might have missed, that two of the numberless leafy brown bumps under the broad cabbage leaves were furry living things, with noses that never ceased to move up and down, whatever else was still. It was Molly and Rag. They were stretched under the skunk cabbage, not because they liked its rank smell, but because the winged ticks could not stand it at all, and so left them in peace. Rabbits have no set time for lessons. They are always learning, but what the lesson is depends on the present stress, and that must arrive before it is known. They went to this place for a quiet rest, but had not been long there when suddenly a warning note from the ever-watchful blue jay caused Molly's nose and ears to go up and her tail to tighten to her back. Away across the swamp was Olifant's big black and white dog, coming straight toward them. "Now," said Molly, "squat while I go and keep that fool out of mischief." Away she went to meet him, and she fearlessly dashed across the dog's path. "Bow, ow, ow," he fairly yelled as he bounded after Molly, but she kept just beyond his reach and led him where the million daggers struck fast and deep, till his tender ears were scratched raw, and guided him at last plump into a hidden barbed wire fence, where he got such a gashing that he went homeward howling with pain. After making a short double, a loop and a balk in case the dog should come back, Molly returned to find that Rag in his eagerness was standing bolt upright and craning his neck to see the sport. This disobedience made her so angry that she struck him with her hind foot and knocked him over in the mud. One day as they fed on the near clover field, a red-tailed hawk came swooping after them. Molly kicked up her hind legs to make fun of him and skipped into the briars along one of their old pathways, where of course the hawk could not follow. It was the main path from the creekside thicket to the stovepipe brush pile. Several creepers had grown across it, and Molly, keeping one eye on the hawk, set to work and cut the creepers off. Rag watched her, then ran on ahead and cut some more that were across the path. "That's right," said Molly. "Always keep the runways clear. You will need them often enough. Not wide, but clear. Cut everything like a creeper across them, and someday you will find you have cut a snare." "Oh, what?" asked Rag, as he scratched his right ear with his left hind foot. "A snare is something that looks like a creeper, but it doesn't grow and it's worse than all the hawks in the world," said Molly, glancing at the now far-away redtail. "For there it hides night and day in the runway till the chance to catch you comes." "I don't believe it could catch me," said Rag, with the pride of youth as he rose on his heels to rub his chin and whiskers high up on a smooth sapling. Rag did not know he was doing this, but his mother saw and knew it was a sign, like the changing of a boy's voice, that her little one was no longer a baby, but would soon be a grown-up cottontail. There is magic in running water. Who does not know it and feel it? The railroad builder fearlessly throws his bank across the wide bog or lake, or the sea itself, but the tiniest nill of running water he treats with great respect, studies its wish and its way, and gives it all it seems to ask. The thirst-parched traveler in the poisonous alkali deserts holds back in deadly fear from the sedgy ponds, till he finds one down whose center is a thin, clear line and a faint flow, the sign of running, living water, and joyfully he drinks. There is magic in running water. No evil spell can cross it. Tam O'Shanter proved its potency in time of sorest need. The wildwood creature, with its deadly foe following tireless on the trail scent, realizes its nearing doom and feels an awful spell. Its strength is spent, its every trick is tried in vain, till the good angel leads it to the water, the running, living water, and dashing in it follows the cooling stream, and then with force renewed, takes to the woods again. There is magic in running water. The hounds come to the very spot and halt and cast about, and halt and cast in vain. Their spell is broken by the merry stream, and the wild thing lives its life. And this was one of the great secrets that Raggylug learned from his mother. After the brie arose, the water is your friend. One hot, muggy night in August, Molly led Rag through the woods. The cotton-white cushion she wore under her tail twinkled ahead, and was his guiding lantern, though it went out as soon as she stopped and sat on it. After a few runs and stops to listen, they came to the edge of the pond. The hylas in the trees above them were singing sleep, sleep, and away out on a sunken log in the deep water, up to his chin in the cooling bath, a bloated bullfrog was singing the praises of a jug of rum. "Follow me still," said Molly and Rabbit, and flop, she went into the pond and struck out for the sunken log in the middle. Rag flinched but plunged with a little ouch, gasping and wobbling his nose very fast but still copying his mother. The same movements as on land sent him through the water, and thus he found he could swim. On he went till he reached the sunken log and scrambled up by his dripping mother on the high dry end, with a rushy screen around them and the water that tells no tales. After this, on warm black nights when that old fox from Springfield came prowling through the swamp, Rag would note the place of the bullfrog's voice, for in case of direst need it might be a guide to safety. And thenceforth the words of the song that the bullfrogs sang were, "Come, come, in danger come." This was the latest study that Rag took up with his mother. It was really a postgraduate course, for many little rabbits never learn it at all. No wild animal dies of old age. Its life has soon or late a tragic end. It is only a question of how long it can hold out against its foes. But Rag's life was proof that once a rabbit passes out of his youth, he is likely to outlive his prime and be killed only in the last third of life, the downhill third we call old age. The Cottontails had enemies on every side. Their daily life was a series of escapes. For dogs, foxes, cats, skunks, coons, weasels, minks, snakes, hawks, owls, and men, and even insects were all plotting to kill them. They had hundreds of adventures, and at least once a day, they had to fly for their lives and save themselves by their legs and wits. More than once, that hateful fox from Springfield drove them to taking refuge under the wreck of a barbed wire hog pen by the spring. But once there, they could look calmly at him while he spiked his legs in vain attempts to reach them. Once or twice, Rag, when hunted, had played off the hound against a skunk that had seemed likely to be quite as dangerous as the dog. Once he was caught alive by a hunter who had a hound and a ferret to help him. But Rag had the luck to escape next day with a yet deeper distrust of ground holes. He was several times run into the water by the cat, and many times was chased by hawks and owls. But for each kind of danger, there was a safeguard. His mother taught him the principal dodges, and he improved on them and made many new ones as he grew older. And the older and wiser he grew, the less he trusted to his legs, and the more to his wits for safety. Ranger was the name of a young hound in the neighborhood. To train him, his master used to put him on the trail of one of the Cottontails. It was nearly always Rag that they ran, for the young buck enjoyed the runs as much as they did, the spice of danger in them being just enough for zest. He would say, "Oh, mother, here comes the dog again. I must have a run today." "You are too bold, Raggy, my son," she might reply. "I fear you will run once too often. But mother, it is such glorious fun to tease that fool dog, and it's all good training. I'll thump if I am too hard pressed, then you can come and change off while I get my second win." On he would come, and Ranger would take the trail and follow till Rag got tired of it. Then he either sent a thumping telegram for help, which brought Molly to take charge of the dog, or he got rid of the dog by Souse's clever trick. A description of one of these shows how well Rag had learned the arts of the woods. He knew that his scent lay best near the ground and was strongest when he was warm. So if he could get off the ground and be left in peace for half an hour to cool off, and for the trail to stale, he knew he would be safe. When therefore he tired of the chase, he made for the creekside briar patch, where he wound, that is zigzagged, till he left a course so crooked that the dog was sure to be greatly delayed in working it out. He then went straight to D in the woods, passing one hop to windward of the high log E. Stopping at D, he followed his back trail to F. Here he leaped aside and ran toward G. Then returning on his trail to J, he waited till the hound passed on his trail at I. Rag then got back on his old trail at H. Anti followed it to E, where, with a scent balk or great leap aside, he reached the high log, and running to its higher end, he sat like a bump. Ranger lost much time in the bramble maze, and the scent was very poor when he got it straightened out and came to D. Here he began to circle to pick it up, and after losing much time, struck the trail which ended suddenly at G. Again he was at fault and had to circle to find the trail. Wider and wider circles, until at last he passed right under the log Rag was on. But a cold scent on a cold day does not go downward much. Rag never budged nor winked, and the hound passed. Again the dog came round. This time he crossed the low part of the log and stopped to smell it. Yes, clearly it was rabbity, but it was a stale scent now. Still he mounted the log. It was a trying moment for Rag as the great hound came sniffing along the log. But his nerve did not forsake him. The wind was right. He had his mind made up to bolt as soon as Ranger came halfway up. But he didn't come. A yellow cur would have seen the rabbit sitting there, but the hound did not, and the scent seemed stale, so he leaped off the log and Rag had won. Rag had never seen any other rabbit than his mother. Indeed, he had scarcely thought about there being any other. He was more and more away from her now, and yet he never felt lonely, for rabbits do not hanker for company. But one day in December, while he was among the red dogwood brush, cutting a new path to the great creekside thicket, he saw all at once against the sky over the sunning bank the head and ears of a strange rabbit. The newcomer had the air of a well-pleased discoverer and soon came hopping Rag's way along one of his paths into a swamp. A new feeling rushed over him, that boiling mixture of anger and hatred called jealousy. The stranger stopped at one of Rag's rubbing trees. That is, a tree against which he used to stand on his heels and rub his chin as far up as he could reach. He thought he did this simply because he liked it, but all buck rabbits do so and several ends are served. It makes the tree rabbity so that other rabbits know that this swamp already belongs to a rabbit family and is not open for settlement. It also lets the next one know by the scent if the last caller was an acquaintance. And the height from the ground of the rubbing places shows how tall the rabbit is. Now to his disgust, Rag noticed that the new corner was a head taller than himself, and a big, stout buck at that. This was a wholly new experience and filled Rag with a wholly new feeling. The spirit of murder entered his heart. He chewed very hard at nothing in his mouth, and hopping forward onto a smooth piece of hard ground, he struck slowly. Thump, 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 which is a rabbit telegram for "get out of my swamp" or "fight." The new corner made a big V with his ears, sat upright for a few seconds, then, dropping on his forefeet, sent along the ground a louder, stronger thump, thump, thump. And so war was declared. They came together by short runs sidewise, each one trying to get the wind of the other and watching for a chance advantage. The stranger was a big, heavy buck with plenty of muscle, but one or two trifles, such as treading on a turnover and failing to close when Rag was on low ground, showed that he had not much cunning and counted on winning his battles by his weight. On he came at last, and Rag met him like a little fury. As they came together, they leaped up and struck out with their hind feet. Thud, thud they came, and down went poor little Rag. In a moment the stranger was on him with his teeth, and Rag was bitten and lost several tufts of hair before he could get up. But he was swift of foot and got out of reach. Again he charged, and again he was knocked down and bitten severely. He was no match for his foe, and it soon became a question of saving his own life. Hurt as he was, he sprang away, with the stranger in full chase, and bound to kill him as well as to oust him from the swamp where he was born. Rag's legs were good, and so was his wind. The stranger was big and so heavy that he soon gave up the chase, and it was well for poor Rag that he did, for he was getting stiff from his wounds as well as tired. From that day began a reign of terror for Rag. His training had been against owls, dogs, weasels, men, and so on, but what to do when chased by another rabbit he did not know. All he knew was to lie low till he was found, then run. Poor little Molly was completely terrorized. She could not help Rag and sought only to hide. But the big buck soon found her out. She tried to run from him, but she was not now so swift as Rag. The stranger made no attempt to kill her, but he made love to her, and because she hated him and tried to get away, he treated her shamefully. Day after day he worried her by following her about, and often, furious at her lasting hatred, he would knock her down and tear out mouthfuls of her soft fur till his rage cooled somewhat, when he would let her go for a while. But his fixed purpose was to kill Rag, whose escape seemed hopeless. There was no other swamp he could go to, and whenever he took a nap now he had to be ready at any moment to dash for his life. A dozen times a day the big stranger came creeping up to where he slept, but each time the watchful Rag awoke in time to escape. To escape, yet not to escape. He saved his life indeed, but oh, what a miserable life it had become. How maddening to be thus helpless, to see his little mother daily beaten and torn, as well as to see all his favorite feeding grounds, the cozy nooks, and the pathways he had made with so much labor, forced from him by this hateful brute. Unhappy Rag realized that to the victor belonged the spoils, and he hated him more than ever he did fox or ferret. How was it to end? He was wearing out with running and watching and bad food, and little Molly's strength and spirit were breaking down under the long persecution. The stranger was ready to go to all lengths to destroy poor Rag, and at last stooped to the worst crime known among rabbits. However much they may hate each other, all good rabbits forget their feuds when their common enemy appears. Yet one day when a great goshawk came swooping over the swamp, the stranger, keeping well under cover himself, tried again and again to drive Rag into the open. Once or twice the hawk nearly had him, but still the briars saved him, and it was only when the big buck himself came near being caught that he gave it up. And again Rag escaped, but was no better off. He made up his mind to leave with his mother, if possible, next night and go into the world in quest of some new home when he heard Old Thunder, the hound, sniffing and searching about the outskirts of the swamp, and he resolved on playing a desperate game. He deliberately crossed the hound's view, and the chase that then began was fast and furious. Thrice around the swamp they went till Rag had made sure that his mother was hidden safely and that his hated foe was in his usual nest. Then right into that nest and plump over him he jumped, giving him a rap with one hind foot as he passed over his head. "You miserable fool, I'll kill you yet," cried the stranger. And up he jumped only to find himself between Rag and the dog and heir to all the peril of the chase. On came the hound, baying hotly on the straightaway scent. The buck's weight and size were great advantages in a rabbit fight, but now they were fatal. He did not know many tricks, just the simple ones like double, wind, and hole up that every baby bunny knows. But the chase was too close for doubling and winding, and he didn't know where the holes were. It was a straight race. The Breer Rose, kind to all rabbits alike, did its best, but it was no use. The baying of the hound was fast and steady, the crashing of the brush and the yelping of the hound each time the briars tore his tender ears were borne to the two rabbits where they crouched in hiding. But suddenly these sounds stopped. There was a scuffle, then loud and terrible screaming. Rag knew what it meant, and it sent a shiver through him, but he soon forgot that when all was over and rejoiced to be once more the master of the dear old swamp. Old Olifant had doubtless a right to burn all those brush piles in the east and south of the swamp, and to clear up the wreck of the old barbed wire hog pen just below the spring. But it was none the less hard on Rag and his mother. The first were their various residences and outposts, and the second their grand fastness and safe retreat. They had so long held the swamp and felt it to be their very own in every part and suburb, including Olifant's grounds and buildings, that they would have resented the appearance of another rabbit even about the adjoining barnyard. Their claim, that of long, successful occupancy, was exactly the same as that by which most nations hold their land, and it would be hard to find a better right. During the time of the January thaw, the Olifants had cut the rest of the large wood about the pond and curtailed the Cottontail's domain on all sides. But they still clung to the dwindling swamp, for it was their home, and they were loath to move to foreign parts. Their life of daily perils went on, but they were still fleet of foot, long of wind, and bright of wit. Of late they had been somewhat troubled by a mink that had wandered upstream to their quiet nook. A little judicious guidance had transferred the uncomfortable visitor to Olifant's henhouse, but they were not yet quite sure that he had been properly looked after. So for the present they gave up using the ground holes, which were, of course, dangerous blind alleys, and stuck closer than ever to the briars and the brush piles that were left. That first snow had quite gone, and the weather was bright and warm until now. Molly, feeling a touch of rheumatism, was somewhere in the lower thicket seeking a tea-berry tonic. Rag was sitting in the weak sunlight on a bank in the east side. The smoke from the familiar gabled chimney of Olifant's house came fitfully drifting a pale blue haze through the underwoods and showing as a dull brown against the brightness of the sky. The sun-gilt gable was cut off midway by the banks of briar brush, that purple in shadow shone like rods of blazing crimson and gold in the light. Beyond the house, the barn with its gable and roof, new gift at the house, stood up like a Noah's Ark. The sounds that came from it, and yet more the delicious smell that mingled with the smoke, told Rag that the animals were being fed cabbage in the yard. Rag's mouth watered at the idea of the feast. He blinked and blinked as he snuffed its odorous promises, for he loved cabbage dearly. But then he had been to the barnyard the night before, after a few paltry clover tops, and no wise rabbit would go 2 nights running to the same place. Therefore he did the wise thing. He moved across where he could not smell the cabbage axe, made his supper of a bundle of hay that had been blown from the stack. Later, when about to settle for the night, he was joined by Molly, who had taken her tea-berry and then eaten her frugal meal of sweet birch near the sunning bank. Meanwhile, the sun had gone about his business elsewhere, taking all his gold and glory with him. Off in the east, a big black shutter came pushing up and rising higher and higher. It spread over the whole sky, shut out all light, and left the world a very gloomy place indeed. Then another mischief maker, the wind, taking advantage of the sun's absence, came on the scene and set about brewing trouble. The weather turned colder and colder. It seemed worse than when the ground had been covered with snow. "Isn't this terribly cold? How I wish we had our stovepipe brush pile," said Rag. "A good night for the pine root hole," replied Molly. "But we have not yet seen the pelt of that mink on the end of the barn, and it is not safe till we do." The hollow hickory was gone. In fact, at this very moment its trunk, lying in the woodyard, was harboring the mink they feared. So the cottontails hopped to the south side of the pond, and choosing a brush pile, they crept under and snuggled down for the night, facing the wind, but with their noses in different directions so as to go out different ways in case of alarm. The wind blew harder and colder as the hours went by, and about midnight a fine icy snow came ticking down on the dead leaves and hissing through the brush heap. It might seem a poor night for hunting, but that old fox from Springfield was out. He came pointing up the wind in the shelter of the swamp and chanced in the lee of the brush pile, where he scented the sleeping cottontails. He halted for a moment, then came stealthily, sneaking up toward the brush under which his nose told him the rabbits were crouching. The noise of the wind and the sleet enabled him to come quite close before Molly heard the faint crunch of a dry leaf under his paw. She touched Rag's whiskers, and both were fully awake just as the fox sprang on them, but they always slept with their legs ready for a jump. Molly darted out into the blinding storm. The fox missed his spring, but followed like a racer, while Rag dashed off to one side. There was only one road for Molly. That was straight up the wind, and bounding for her life, she gained a little over the unfrozen mud that would not carry the fox till she reached the margin of the pond. No chance to turn now. On she must go. Splash! Splash! Through the weeds she went, then plunged into the deep water, and plunge went the fox close behind. But it was too much for Reynard on such a night. He turned back, and Molly, seeing only one course, struggled through the reeds into the deep water and struck out for the other shore. But there was a strong headwind. The little waves, icy cold, broke over her head as she swam, and the water was full of snow that blocked her way like soft ice or floating mud. The dark line of the other shore seemed far, far away, with perhaps the fox waiting for her there. But she laid her ears flat to be out of the gale, and bravely put forth all her strength with wind and tide against her. After a long, weary swim in the cold water, she had nearly reached the farther reeds, when a great mass of floating snow barred her road. Then the wind on the bank made strange, fox-like sounds that robbed her of all force, and she was drifted far backward before she could get free from the floating bar. Again the struck out, but slowly, oh so slowly now. And when at last she reached the lee of the tall reeds, her limbs were numbed, her strength spent. Her brave little heart was sinking, and she cared no more whether the fox were there or not. Through the reeds she did indeed pass, but once in the weeds her course wavered and slowed. Her feeble strokes no longer sent her landward. The ice forming around her stopped her altogether. In a little while the cold, weak limbs ceased to move. The furry nose-tip of the little mother cottontail wobbled no more, and the soft brown eyes were closed in death. But there was no fox waiting to tear her with ravenous jaws. Rag had escaped the first onset of the foe, and as soon as he regained his wits, he came running back to change off, and so help his mother. He met the old fox going round the pond to meet Molly, and led him far and away, then dismissed him with a barbed wire gash on his head, and came to the bank and sought about, and trailed and thumped. But all his searching was in vain. He could not find his little mother. He never saw her again, and he never knew whither she went, for she slept her never-waking sleep in the ice arms of her friend, the water that tells no tales. Poor little Molly Cottontail. She was a true heroine, yet only one of unnumbered millions that without a thought of heroism have lived and done their best in their little world and died. She fought a good fight in the battle of life. She was good stuff, the stuff that never dies. For flesh of her flesh and brain of her brain was Rag. She lives in him, and through him transmits a finer fiber to her race, and Rag still lives in the swamp. Old Olifant died that winter, and the unthrifty sons ceased to clear the swamp or mend the wire fences. Within a single year it was a wilder place than ever. Fresh trees and brambles grew, and falling wires made many cottontail castles and last retreats that dogs and foxes dared not storm. And there to this day lives Rag. He is a big, strong buck now and fears no rivals. He has a large family of his own and a pretty brown wife that he got I know not where. There, no doubt, he and his children's children will flourish for many years to come, and there you may see them any sunny evening if you have learnt their signal S code, and, choosing a good spot on the ground, know just how and when to thump it. Wild Animals I Have Known by Ernest Thompson Seton. Bingo, the story of my dog. It was early in November 1882, and the Manitoba winter had just set in. I was tilting back in my chair for a few lazy moments after breakfast, idly alternating my gaze from the one window pane of our shanty, through which was framed a bit of the prairie and the end of our cowshed, to the old rhyme of the Franklin's dog pinned on the logs nearby. But the dreamy mixture of rhyme and view was quickly dispelled by the sight of a large gray animal dashing across the prairie into the cowshed, with a smaller black and white animal in hot pursuit. "A wolf!" I exclaimed, and seizing a rifle dashed out to help the dog. But before I could get there, they had left the stable, and after a short run over the snow, the wolf again turned at bay, and the dog, our neighbor's collie, circled about watching his chance to snap. I fired a couple of long shots, which had the effect only of setting them off again over the prairie. After another run, this matchless dog closed and seized the wolf by the haunch, but again retreated to avoid the fierce return chop. Then there was another stand at bay, and again a race over the snow. Every few hundred yards this scene was repeated, the dog managing so that each fresh rush should be toward the settlement, while the wolf vainly tried to break back toward the dark belt of trees in the east. At last, after a mile of this fighting and running, I overtook them, and the dog, seeing that he now had good backing, closed in for the finish. After a few seconds, the whirl of struggling animals resolved itself into a wolf on his back, with a bleeding collie gripping his throat. And it was now easy for me to step up and end the fight by putting a ball through the wolf's head. Then, when this dog of marvelous wind saw that his foe was dead, he gave him no second glance, but set out at a lope for a farm 4 miles across the snow, where he had left his master when first the wolf was started. He was a wonderful dog, and even if I had not come, he undoubtedly would have killed the wolf alone, as I learned he had already done with others of the kind, in spite of the fact that the wolf, though of the smaller or prairie race, was much larger than himself. I was filled with admiration for the dog's prowess, and at once sought to buy him at any price. The scornful reply of his owner was, "Why don't you try to buy one of the children?" Since Frank was not in the market, I was obliged to content myself with the next best thing, one of his alleged progeny, that is, a son of his wife. This probable offspring of an illustrious sire was a reliefly ball of black fur that looked more like a long-tailed bear cub than a puppy. But he had some tan markings like those on Frank's coat that were, I hoped, guarantees of future greatness, and also a very characteristic ring of white that he always wore on his muzzle. Having got possession of his person, the next thing was to find him a name. Surely this puzzle was already solved. The rhyme of the Franklin's dogga was inbuilt with the foundation of our acquaintance. So with adequate pomp, we yclept him Little Bingo. The rest of that winter, Bingo spent in our shanty, living the life of a blubbery, fat, well-meaning, ill-doing puppy, gorging himself with food and growing bigger and clumsier each day. Even sad experience failed to teach him that he must keep his nose out of the rat trap. His most friendly overtures to the cat were wholly misunderstood and resulted only in an armed neutrality that varied by occasional reigns of terror, continued to the end, which came when Bingo, who early showed a mind of his own, got a notion for sleeping at the barn and avoiding the shanty altogether. When the spring came, I set about his serious education. After much pains on my behalf and many pains on his, he learned to go at the word in quest of our old yellow cow that pastured at will on the unfenced prairie. Once he had learned his business, he became very fond of it, and nothing pleased him more than an order to go and fetch the cow. Away he would dash, barking with pleasure and leaping high in the air, that he might better scan the plain for his victim. In a short time he would return driving her at full gallop before him, and gave her no peace until, puffing and blowing, she was safely driven into the farthest corner of her stable. Less energy on his part would have been more satisfactory, but we bore with him until he grew so fond of this semi-daily hunt that he began to bring old done without being told. And at length, not once or twice, but a dozen times a day, this energetic cowherd would sally forth on his own responsibility and drive the cow home to the stable. At last, things came to such a pass that whenever he felt like taking a little exercise, or had a few minutes of spare time, or even happened to think of it, Bingo would sally forth at racing speed over the plain, and a few minutes later return, driving the unhappy yellow cow at full gallop before him. At first this did not seem very bad, as it kept the cow from straying too far, but soon it was seen that it hindered her feeding. She became thin and gave less milk. It seemed to weigh on her mind too, as she was always watching nervously for that hateful dog, and in the mornings would hang around the stable as though afraid to venture off and subject herself at once to an onset. This was going too far. All attempts to make Bingo more moderate in his pleasure were failures, so he was compelled to give it up altogether. After this, though he dared not bring her home, he continued to show his interest by lying at her stable door while she was being milked. As the summer came on, the mosquitoes became a dreadful plague, and the consequent vicious switching of Dun's tail at milking time was even more annoying than the mosquitoes. Fred, the brother who did the milking, was of an inventive as well as an impatient turn of mind, and he devised a simple plan to stop the switching. He fastened a brick to the cow's tail, then set blithely about his work assured of unusual comfort, while the rest of us looked on in doubt. Suddenly, through the mist of mosquitoes came a dull whack and an outburst of language. The cow went on placidly chewing till Fred got on his feet and furiously attacked her with the milking stool. It was bad enough to be whacked on the ear with a brick by a stupid old cow, but the uproarious enjoyment and ridicule of the bystanders made it unendurable. Bingo, hearing the uproar, and divining that he was needed, rushed in and attacked Dun on the other side. Before the affair quieted down, the milk was spilt, the pail and stool were broken, and the cow and the dog severely beaten. Poor Bingo could not understand it at all. He had long ago learned to despise that cow, and now in utter disgust he decided to forsake even her stable door, and from that time be attached himself exclusively to the horses in their stable. The cattle were mine, the horses were my brother's, and in transferring his allegiance from the cow stable to the horse stable, Bingo seemed to give me up too, and anything like daily companionship ceased, and yet whenever any emergency arose, Bingo turned to me and I to him, and both seemed to feel that the bond between man and dog is one that lasts as long as life. The only other occasion on which Bingo acted as cowherd was in the autumn of the same year at the annual Carberry Fair. Among the dazzling inducements to enter one's stock there was, in addition to a prospect of glory, a cash prize of $2 for the best collie in training. Misled by a false friend, I entered Bingo, and early on the day fixed, the cow was driven to the prairie just outside of the village. When the time came, she was pointed out to Bingo, and the word given, "Go fetch the cow." It was the intention, of course, that he should bring her to me at the judge's stand, but the animals knew better. They hadn't rehearsed all summer for nothing. When Dun saw Bingo's careering form, she knew that her only hope for safety was to get into her stable, and Bingo was equally sure that his sole mission in life was to quicken her pace in that direction. So off they raced over the prairie, like a wolf after a deer, and heading straight toward their home 2 miles away, they disappeared from view. That was the last that judge or jury ever saw of dog or cow. The prize was awarded to the only other entry. Bingo's loyalty to the horses was quite remarkable. By day he trotted beside them, and by night he slept at the stable door. Where the team went, Bingo went, and nothing kept him away from them. This interesting assumption of ownership lent the greater significance to the following circumstance. I was not superstitious and up to this time had had no faith in omens, but was now deeply impressed by a strange occurrence in which Bingo took a leading part. There were but 2 of us now living on the De Winton farm. One morning my brother set out for Boggy Creek for a load of hay. It was a long day's journey there and back, and he made an early start. Strange to tell, Bingo, for once in his life, did not follow the team. My brother called to him, but still he stood at a safe distance, and eyeing the team askance, refused to stir. Suddenly he raised his nose in the air and gave vent to a long, melancholy howl. He watched the wagon out of sight, and even followed for 100 yards or so, raising his voice from time to time in the most doleful howlings. All that day he stayed about the barn, the only time that he was willingly separated from the horses, and at intervals howled a very death dirge. I was alone, and the dog's behavior inspired me with an awful foreboding of calamity that weighed upon use more and more as the hours passed away. About 6 o'clock, Bingo's howlings became unbearable, so that for lack of a better thought, I threw something at him and ordered him away. But oh, the feeling of horror that filled me. Why did I let my brother go away alone? Should I ever again see him alive? I might have known from the dog's actions that something dreadful was about to happen. At length, the hour for his return arrived, and there was John on his load. I took charge of the horses, vastly relieved, and with an air of assumed unconcern asked, "All right?" "Right," was the laconic answer. Who now can say that there is nothing in omens? And yet, when long afterward I told this to one skilled in the occult, he looked grave and said, "Bingo always turned to you in a crisis?" "Yes." "Then do not smile. It was you that were in danger that day. He stayed and saved your life, though you never knew from what." Early in the spring, I bade begun Bingo's education. Very shortly afterward, he began mine. Midway on the 2-mile stretch of prairie that lay between our shanty and the village of Carberry was the corner stake of the farm. It was a stout post in a low mound of earth and was visible from afar. I soon noticed that Bingo never passed without minutely examining this mysterious post. Next, I learned that it was also visited by the prairie wolves as well as by all the dogs in the neighborhood. And at length, with the aid of a telescope, I made a number of observations that helped me to an understanding of the matter and enabled me to enter more fully into Bingo's private life. The post was by common agreement a registry of the canine tribes. Their exquisite sense of smell enabled each individual to tell at once by the track and trace what other had recently been at the post. When the snow came, much more was revealed. I then discovered that this post was but one of a system that covered the country, that in short, the entire region was laid out in signal stations at convenient intervals. These were marked by any conspicuous post, stone, buffalo skull, or other object that chanced to be in the desired locality. And extensive observations showed that it was a very complete system for getting and giving the news. Each dog or wolf makes a point of calling at those stations that are near his line of travel to learn who has recently been there, just as a man calls at his club on returning to town and looks up the register. I have seen Bingo approach the post, sniff, examine the ground about, then growl and with bristling mane and glowing eyes, scratch fiercely and contemptuously with his hind feet, finally walking off very stiffly, glancing back from time to time. All of which, being interpreted, said, woof, there's that dirty cur of McCarthy's. Woof, I'll tend to him tonight. Woof, woof. On another occasion, after the preliminaries, he became keenly interested and studied a coyote's track that came and went, saying to himself, as I afterward learned, "A coyote track coming from the north, smelling of dead cow. Indeed, Polworth's old brindle must be dead at last. This is worth looking into." At other times, he would wag his tail, trot about the vicinity, and come again and again to make his own visit more evident, perhaps for the benefit of his brother Bill, just back from Brandon. So that it was not by chance that one night Bill turned up at Bingo's home and was taken to the hills, where a delicious dead horse afforded a chance to suitably celebrate the reunion. At other times, he would be suddenly aroused by the news, take up the trail, and race to the next station for later information. Sometimes his inspection produced only an air of grave attention, as though he said to himself, "Dear me, who the deuce is this?" Or, "It seems to me I met that fellow at the portage last summer." One morning on approaching the post, Bingo's every hair stood on end, his tail dropped and quivered, and he gave proof that he was suddenly sick at the stomach, sure signs of terror. He showed no desire to follow up or know more of the matter, but returned to the house, and half an hour afterward, his mane was still bristling and his expression one of hate or fear. I studied the dreaded track and learned that in Bingo's language, the half-terrified, deep-gurgled grrruff means timber wolf. These were among the things that Bingo taught me, and in the aftertime when I might chance to see him arouse from his frosty nest by the stable door, and after stretching himself and shaking the snow from his shaggy coat, they'd disappear into the gloom at a steady trot. Trot, trot, I used to think. Ah, old dog, I know where you're off to, and why you eschew the shelter of the shanty. Now I know why your nightly trips over the country are so well timed, and how you know just where to go for what you want, and when and how to seek it. In the autumn of 1884, the shanty at De Winton Farm was closed, and Bingo changed his home to the establishment. That is, to the stable, not the house, of Gordon Wright, our most intimate neighbor. Since the winter of his puppyhood, he had declined to enter a house at any time, excepting during a thunderstorm. Of thunder and guns he had a deep dread. No doubt the fear of the first originated in the second, and that arose from some unpleasant shotgun experiences, the cause of which will be seen. His nightly couch was outside the stable, even during the coldest weather, and it was easy to see he enjoyed to the full the complete nocturnal liberty entailed. Bingo's midnight wanderings extended across the plains for miles. There was plenty of proof of this. Some farmers at very remote points sent word to old Gordon that if he did not keep his dog home nights, they would use the shotgun, and Bingo's terror of firearms would indicate that the threats were not idle. A man living as far away as Petrel said he saw a large black wolf kill a coyote on the snow one winter evening. But afterward, he changed his opinion and reckoned it must have been Wright's dog. Whenever the body of a winter-killed ox or horse was exposed, Bingo was sure to repair to it nightly, and driving away the prairie wolves, feast to repletion. Sometimes the object of a night foray was merely to maul some distant neighbor's dog, and notwithstanding vengeful threats, there seemed no reason to fear that the Bingo breed would die out. One man even avowed that he had seen a prairie wolf accompanied by 3 young ones, which resembled the mother, excepting that they were very large and black, and had a ring of white around the muzzle. True or not as that may be, I know that late in March, while we were out in the sleigh with Bingo trotting behind, a prairie wolf was started from a hollow. Away it went with Bingo in full chase, but the wolf did not greatly exert itself to escape, and within a short distance Bingo was close up, yet strange to tell, there was no grappling, no fight. Bingo trotted amiably alongside and licked the wolf's nose. We were astounded and shouted to urge Bingo on. Our shouting and approach several times started the wolf off at speed, and Bingo again pursued until he had overtaken it, but his gentleness was too obvious. "It is a she-wolf. He won't harm her," I exclaimed as the truth dawned on me. And Gordon said, "Well, I be darned." So we called our unwilling dog and drove on. For weeks after this, we were annoyed by the depredations of a prairie wolf who killed our chickens, stale pieces of pork from the end of the house, and several times terrified the children by looking into the window of the shanty while the men were away. Against this animal, Bingo seemed to be no safeguard. At length the wolf, a female, was killed, and then Bingo plainly showed his hand by his lasting enmity toward Oliver, the man who did the deed. It is wonderful and beautiful how a man and his dog will stick to one another through thick and thin. Butler tells of an undivided Indian tribe in the far north which was all but exterminated by an internecine feud over a dog that belonged to one man and was killed by his neighbor. And among ourselves we have lawsuits, fights, and deadly feuds, all pointing the same old moral: love me, love my dog. One of our neighbors had a very fine hound that he thought the best and dearest dog in the world. I loved him, so I loved his dog. And when one day poor Tan crawled home terribly mangled and died by the door, I joined my threats of vengeance with those of his master, and thenceforth lost no opportunity of tracing the miscreant, both by offering rewards and by collecting scraps of evidence. At length it was clear that one of 3 men to the southward had had a hand in the cruel affair. The scent was warming up, and soon we should have been in a position to exact rigorous justice, at least from the wretch who had murdered poor old Tan. Then something took place which at once changed my mind and led me to believe that the mangling of the old hound was not by any means an unpardonable crime, but indeed on second thoughts was rather commendable than otherwise. Gordon Wright's farm lay to the south of us, and while there one day Gordon Jr., knowing that I was tracking the murderer, took me aside and looking about furtively, he whispered in tragic tones, "It was Bing done it." and the matter dropped right there. For I confess that from that moment I did all in my power to baffle the justice I had previously striven so hard to further. I had given Bingo away long before, but the feeling of ownership did not die, and of this indissoluble fellowship of dog and man, he was soon to take part in another important illustration. Old Gordon and Oliver were close neighbors and friends. They joined in a contract to cut wood and worked together harmoniously till late on in winter. Then Oliver's old horse died, and he, determining to profit as far as possible, dragged it out on the plain and laid poison baits for wolves around it. Alas for poor Bingo! He would lead a wolfish life, though again and again it brought him into wolfish misfortunes. He was as fond of dead horse as any of his wild kindred. That very night, with Wright's own dog, Curly, he visited the carcass. It seemed as though Bing had busied himself chiefly keeping off the wolves, but Curly feasted immoderately. The tracks in the snow told the story of the banquet, the interruption as the poison began to work, and of the dreadful spasms of pain during the erratic course back home, where Curly, falling in convulsions at Gordon's feet, died in the greatest agony. Love me, love my dog. No explanations or apology were acceptable. It was useless to urge that it was accidental. The long-standing feud between Bingo and Oliver was now remembered as an important sidelight. The wood contract was thrown up, all friendly relations ceased, and to this day there is no county big enough to hold the rival factions, which were called at once into existence and to arms by Curly's dying yell. It was months before Bingo really recovered from the poison. We believed indeed that he never again would be the sturdy old-time Bingo. But when the spring came, he began to gain strength, and bettering as the grass grew, he was within a few weeks once more in full health and vigor to be a pride to his friends and a nuisance to his neighbors. Changes took me far away from Manitoba, and on my return in 1886, Bingo was still a member of Wright's household. I thought he would have forgotten me after 2 years' absence, but not so. One day early in the winter, after having been lost for 48 hours, he crawled home to Wright's with a wolf trap and a heavy log fast to one foot, and the foot frozen to stony hardness. No one had been able to approach to help him. He was so savage when I, the stranger now, stooped down and laid hold of the trap with one hand and his leg with the other. Instantly he seized my wrist in his teeth. Without stirring, I said, "Bing, don't you know me?" He had not broken the skin and at once released his hold and offered no further resistance, although he whined a good deal during the removal of the trap. He still acknowledged me his master in spite of his change of residence and my long absence, and notwithstanding my surrender of ownership, I still felt that he was my dog. Bing was carried into the house much against his will, and his frozen foot thawed out. During the rest of the winter, he went lame, and 2 of his toes eventually dropped off. But before the return of warm weather, his health and strength were fully restored, and to a casual glance he bore no mark of his dreadful experience in the steel trap. During that same winter, I caught many wolves and foxes who did not have Bingo's good luck in escaping the traps, which I kept out right into the spring, for bounties are good even when fur is not. Kennedy's Plain was always a good trapping ground because it was unfrequented by man, and yet lay between the heavy woods and the settlement. I had been fortunate with the fur here, and late in April rode in on one of my regular rounds. The wolf traps are made of heavy steel and have 2 springs, each of 100 pounds power. They are set in 4s around a buried bait, and after being strongly fastened to concealed logs, are carefully covered in cotton and in fine sand so as to be quite invisible. A prairie wolf was caught in one of these. I killed him with a club and throwing him aside proceeded to reset the trap as I had done so many hundred times before. All was quickly done. I threw the trap wrench over toward the pony, and seeing some fine sand nearby, I reached out for a handful of it to add a good finish to the setting. Oh, unlucky thought. Oh, mad heedlessness born of long immunity. That fine sand was on the next wolf trap, and in an instant I was a prisoner. Although not wounded, for the traps have no teeth, and my thick trapping gloves deadened the snap, I was firmly caught across the hand above the knuckles. Not greatly alarmed at this, I tried to reach the trap wrench with my right foot. Stretching out at full length, face downward, I worked myself toward it, making my imprisoned arm as long and straight as possible. I could not see and reach at the same time, but counted on my toe telling me when I touched the little iron key to my fetters. My first effort was a failure. Strain as I might at the chain, my toe struck no metal. I swung slowly around my anchor, but still failed. Then a painfully taken observation showed I was much too far to the west. I set about working around, tapping blindly with my toe to discover the key. Thus wildly groping with my right foot, I forgot about the other till there was a sharp clank and the iron jaws of trap number S closed tight on my left foot. The terrors of the situation did not at first impress me, but I soon found that all my struggles were in vain. I could not get free from either trap or move the traps together, and there I lay stretched out and firmly staked to the ground. What would become of me now? There was not much danger of freezing, for the cold weather was over, but Kennedy's plain was never visited by the winter woodcutters. No one knew where I had gone, and unless I could manage to free myself, there was no prospect ahead but to be devoured by wolves, or else die of cold and starvation. As I lay there, the red sun went down over the spruce swamp west of the plain, and a shorelark on a gopher mound a few yards off twittered his evening song, just as one had done the night before at our shanty door. And though the numb pains were creeping up my arm and a deadly chill possessed me, I noticed how long his little ear tufts were. Then my thoughts went to the comfortable supper table at Wright's shanty, and I thought, now they are frying the pork for supper or just sitting down. My pony still stood as I left him, with his bridle on the ground, patiently waiting to take me home. He did not understand the long delay, and when I called, he ceased nibbling the grass and looked at me in dumb, helpless inquiry. If he would only go home, the empty saddle might tell the tale and bring help. But his very faithfulness kept him waiting hour after hour while I was perishing of cold and hunger. Then I remembered how old Giroux the trapper had been lost, and in the following spring his comrades found his skeleton held by the leg in a bear trap. I wondered which part of my clothing would show my identity. Then a new thought came to me. This is how a wolf feels when he is trapped. Oh, what misery have I been responsible for? Now I'm to pay for it. Night came slowly on. A prairie wolf howled. The pony pricked up his ears and, walking nearer to me, stood with his head down. Then another prairie wolf howled, and another, and I could make out that they were gathering in the neighborhood. There I lay prone and helpless, wondering if it would not be strictly just that they should come and tear me to pieces. I heard them calling for a long time before I realized that dim, shadowy forms were sneaking near. The horse saw them first, and his terrified snort drove them back at first. But they came nearer next time and sat around me on the prairie. Soon one bolder than the others crawled up and tugged at the body of his dead relative. I shouted and he retreated growling. The pony ran to a distance in terror. Presently the wolf returned, and after 2 or 3 of these retreats and returns, the body was dragged off and devoured by the rest in a few minutes. After this they gathered nearer and sat on their haunches to look at me, and the boldest one smelt the rifle and scratched dirt on it. He retreated when I kicked at him with my free foot and shouted, but growing bolder as I grew weaker, he came and snarled right in my face. At this, several others snarled and came up closer, and I realized that I was to be devoured by the foe that I most despised, when suddenly out of the gloom with a guttural roar sprang a great black wolf. The prairie wolves scattered like chaff except the bold one, which, seized by the black new corner, was in a few moments a draggled corpse. And then, oh horrors! This mighty brute bounded at me and, Bingo, noble Bingo, rubbed his shaggy, panting sides against me and licked my cold face. Bingo, old boy, fetch me the trap wrench. Away he went and returned dragging the rifle, for he knew only that I wanted something. No, Bing, the trap wrench. This time it was my sash, but at last he brought the wrench and wagged his tail in joy that it was right. Reaching out with my free hand, after much difficulty I unscrewed the pillar nut. The trap fell apart and my hand was released, and a minute later I was free. Bing brought the pony up, and after slowly walking to restore the circulation, I was able to mount. Then slowly at first, but soon at a gallop, with Bingo as herald careering and barking ahead, we set out for home, there to learn that the night before, though never taken on the trapping rounds, The brave dog had acted strangely, whimpering and watching the timber trail. And at last, when night came on, in spite of attempts to detain him, he had set out in the gloom, and guided by a knowledge that is beyond us, had reached the spot in time to avenge me as well as set me free. Staunch old Bing. He was a strange dog. Though his heart was with me, he passed me next day with scarcely a look, but responded with alacrity when little Gordon called him to a gopher hunt. And it was so to the end. And to the end also he lived the wolfish life that he loved, and never failed to seek the winter-killed horses, and found one again with a poison bait, and wolfishly bolted that. Then, feeling the pang, set out, not for rights but to find me, and reached the door of my shanty where I should have been. Next day on returning, I found him dead in the snow with his head on the sill of the door of his puppyhood's days, my dog to the last in his heart of hearts. It was my help he sought, and vainly sought, in the hour of his bitter extremity.